You ever wonder what truckers really see out there, on those endless back roads, midnight highways, and fog-choked mountain passes? Tonight, we're diving into 10 new true trucker horror stories. Encounters so disturbing, most drivers refuse to speak of them. But we found the ones who did, and what they shared will crawl under your skin. If you love creepy stories like these, tap like. It helps this video reach more horror lovers like you. Comment where you're watching from. Every viewer is part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family is tuning in from. Let me know which story haunted you the most. And if you're brave enough to stay till the end, hit subscribe. Your support means everything and helps us keep digging up these terrifying tales. Now buckle up, because once you hit the road with these truckers, there's no turning back. I've been driving trucks through the Appalachian stretch of Route 19 for almost 15 years. It's not the easiest run, miles of tight curves through fog, valleys that swallow radio signals, and bridges that moan like they're alive when the wind pushes through. But I liked the quiet. I liked being alone. That night in early March, the fog came earlier than usual. It rolled in thick and low, hugging the asphalt until it looked like the road was sinking beneath milk. My dispatcher had me hauling lumber from Bluefield down toward Abingdon, cutting through the ridge roads most drivers avoid at night. I'd done it 100 times. But that night, something about the silence felt different, like the world had turned itself off and forgot to tell me. I hadn't seen another car for hours when I spotted the figure. He was standing just past a bend at the edge of my high beams. A man in a dark coat, head down, one arm limp at his side. The fog drifted around him like smoke. I slowed down, more out of instinct than kindness, and rolled the window halfway. "You all right?" I called out. He didn't answer, just turned his head slightly toward me. I saw his face for half a second, pale, expressionless, eyes sunken deep like he hadn't slept in days. "Where you headed?" I asked. He nodded toward the road. That was it. It was cold enough to bite through the cab, so I told him to get in. He climbed up slow, boots scraping the steps, and settled into the passenger seat without a word. The smell hit me then. Damp clothes, faint mildew, like someone who'd been sleeping rough for weeks. He kept both hands folded in his lap and stared straight ahead. I tried a few small questions. "Where you from? You need a ride into town?" Nothing. Not even a blink. For miles, it was just the hum of the engine and the wipers squealing across the windshield. The fog pressed against the glass thick as smoke, and I couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. Every now and then, I thought I heard him breathing differently. Short, shallow, like he was fighting to keep it quiet. About an hour later, I pulled into a small rest stop near Rosedale, one of those forgotten ones with a single vending machine and a flickering light over the bathrooms. I told him we'd stop for a bit. He didn't move at first, then finally opened the door and stepped out. He didn't even look back at me. Just walked straight toward the tree line behind the rest stop, slow and steady, until the fog swallowed him. I waited a few minutes. Then I went inside to use the restroom. The air inside was heavy with that smell of rot. Old water, mildew, the kind that sticks to your clothes. The floor was damp. One of the stalls was half open, but I didn't check it. I just washed my hands and left. When I came back out, the man was gone. I figured he'd taken off down the road, or maybe cut through the woods to another town. I wasn't about to go chasing some drifter in the fog. But as I climbed back into the cab, I noticed something odd. The passenger seat was wet. Not like rain-soaked. More like he'd been sitting there dripping, leaving a dark patch that was almost black against the vinyl. And the smell was stronger now. Earthy, metallic. I drove off without thinking much about it. The fog thinned after a few miles, and I started to feel stupid for letting it get to me. Just a hitchhiker, I told myself. Just another lonely night on the road. But when I stopped at the next fuel station about 40 miles down, everything changed. The place was called Miller's Fuel and Rest, one of those 24-hour stops with old fluorescent lights that buzz louder than the music on the radio. I parked by the pumps, went inside, and told the guy at the counter I needed coffee and a place to rest for a bit. He looked half asleep, maybe mid-50s, beard gone gray. "Long night?" he asked. "Fog's bad up there," I said, rubbing my eyes. "Picked up a hitchhiker earlier. Guy looked half dead." He frowned. "Tonight?" "Yeah, dropped him back at that little rest area up by Rosedale. You know it?" He just stared at me for a second, then shook his head slow. "Buddy, that place ain't been open in weeks. Pipes froze over last month, ain't nobody out there." I laughed a little, waiting for him to smirk, but he didn't. He was serious. "What do you mean, nobody? The lights were on, bathrooms were open." He shook his head again. "We got the maintenance feed from the county. Power's been cut off since February. You sure you weren't seeing things?" Something in my chest tightened. "I'm sure," I said quietly. "I talked to him." The man looked uneasy now. He walked around the counter, went into a little office, and waved for me to follow. Inside was a grainy monitor showing black and white feeds of the parking lot and fuel lanes. He rewound a few minutes back to when I'd arrived. He pointed at the screen. "There, that you?" I nodded. The footage showed me climbing out of the truck, heading toward the entrance. Nothing strange. Then he fast-forwarded a little. I saw myself come back out, walking toward the cab, turning like I was talking to someone standing beside me. Except no one was there. On the screen, it was just me, gesturing toward an empty patch of air. The door of the truck opened, like someone invisible had pulled it, and then shut again. The attendant let the tape play another few seconds, then looked at me. "You came in alone," he said softly. "Been alone since you pulled up." I felt my throat close. My mouth was dry. I told him to stop the tape, but he kept watching it, his eyes narrowing like he was trying to make sense of it. On the footage, I just sat there in the cab, my lips moving, talking to no one. I don't remember what I said. I don't even remember leaving. The next thing I knew, I was back on Route 19, the fog creeping in again, like it hadn't gone anywhere. I kept driving until dawn, trying to convince myself it was exhaustion, that maybe I'd nodded off and dreamed parts of it. But when I cleaned out the cab later that week, I found something wedged beneath the passenger seat. It was a soaked, mud-caked glove. Leather, torn at the thumb, stiff with dried water. It smelled faintly of rot, that same wet, metallic scent. I threw it out, but for days afterward, my cab still reeked like damp earth. That was 3 months ago. I still run that route sometimes, though I avoid Rosedale when I can. But every now and then, when the fog gets heavy and the radio cuts out, I swear I hear something shift in the passenger seat. The faint rustle of wet fabric, the smell of rain-soaked leather. And I can't help thinking about the footage, how the door opened on its own, and how, right before it shut, the camera flickered. Just enough to catch something that looked like a face leaning toward mine. Or maybe that's just what I tell myself because the alternative is worse, that I really was alone the whole time, and something else is still riding with me. I've been driving long enough to know when something feels wrong with a load. You can't quite explain it. It's not about weight or balance, it's just this quiet pressure you feel in your chest, like the road itself is trying to warn you. That night, I was hauling frozen meat through the Appalachian mountains. The route was familiar. Charleston to Bristol, a long stretch that twists through hollows and ridges so dark they seem to swallow your headlights whole. The company gave me a refrigerated trailer, one of the older Thermo Kings with a whine like a sick animal. It was already past midnight when I stopped near Elkhorn Creek for a smoke and a tire check. Mist was creeping down from the trees, the kind that sits low to the ground and makes your boots vanish when you look down. The truck lights caught it in soft beams, glowing white and silent. When I walked to the back of the trailer, I noticed something strange. Long, uneven scratches on the inside of the rear doors, deep enough to scrape the metal. I ran my fingers across them. The grooves were sharp, too fresh to be old. I remember muttering, "What the hell?" under my breath, my voice small in all that fog. I told myself it could have been from a forklift, or maybe frozen pallets shifting and cutting in. But these weren't gouges from movement. They were jagged, erratic, like something tried to claw its way out. Still, I shut the doors, locked the latch, and told myself I was being stupid. The cab felt colder than usual when I got back in. My thermos coffee had gone lukewarm, and the air smelled faintly metallic, like wet iron. I rolled the window a little to breathe better, but all I got was the damp smell of moss and diesel. Dispatch called around 1:30 a.m., checking on my progress. The voice on the other end, some new night operator, asked if I'd noticed anything unusual with the trailer. That got my attention. I told him about the scratches. There was silence on the line, too long to be just a delay. Then he said quietly, "Yeah, we got a note about that one. Last driver on that route quit after hearing something breathing in there. But don't worry, that trailer's been cleaned and cleared. Probably just old damage." He laughed after that, but it sounded forced. When the call ended, I sat there in the hum of the idling engine, the fog thickening around the truck like smoke. The woods were dead quiet, no insects, no frogs, not even the usual drip of condensation. I thought about opening the trailer to check again, but something in me refused. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like respect, like knowing not to step into deep water when you can't see the bottom. Instead, I kept driving. By the time I reached the higher ridges past Welch, the temperature gauge showed below freezing. The engine strained on the climbs, the trailer moaning as it flexed around tight curves. That's when I heard it, faint, almost lost in the sound of the road, a soft thump, then another, like something shifting its weight inside the trailer. I turned off the radio and listened harder. Nothing. After a few miles, the noise came again, heavier this time, a dragging sound. I pressed the brakes and pulled over by a gravel turnout overlooking a dark valley. Rain was starting, just light drops at first, tapping the mirrors. I walked around the rig again, my flashlight beam cutting through mist. The locks were still sealed, frost forming around the latch. But when I leaned close, I swear, I heard something on the other side of the metal. Slow, uneven breaths, like someone trying not to be heard. I froze there, one hand on the cold door. After a long minute, it stopped. Nothing but the whine of the refrigeration unit and the whisper of rain. I went back to the cab and drove the rest of the night without stopping again. Still, every bump in the road felt like something shifting behind me, something waiting. The next morning, I pulled into a rest stop outside Abingdon, Virginia. The rain had turned to sleet by then, coating the trailer in a thin layer of ice. My hands were shaking from too much coffee and not enough sleep. The trailer was due to be dropped at a cold storage facility in town, so I figured I'd check the locks one more time before turning it in. When I got to the back, I saw new scratches. Not on the inside this time, on the outside. Thin, desperate lines running down the right door like something had scraped at it from within, then reached out. My stomach sank. I stepped back and looked around the lot. There were only 2 other trucks there, both idling far away. No one close enough to see me. I tried to call dispatch again, but the signal was garbage. The hills around there always kill reception. So I did the thing I shouldn't have. I unlatched the lock. The door stuck for a second, frozen shut. Then it cracked open with a sucking sound, a puff of cold air escaping that smelled like meat, ammonia, and something faintly sweet like rotting fruit. The interior lights flickered weakly. The cargo was there, stacks of boxed beef wrapped in plastic and frost. Everything looked fine, but at the very back, just above the wheel well, I saw more of those claw marks. Deeper this time. Some had torn clean through the metal. I climbed in slowly, flashlight in hand. The air was so cold it burned my throat. When I reached the rear wall, I noticed something buried between 2 pallets, a small hole, no bigger than a fist, lined with frost and torn insulation. And around it, blood. Dark, frozen specks sprayed across the floor. Not fresh, but not old either. I backed out quick, heart pounding. I slammed the doors shut and stood there in the sleet, trying to breathe. For a second, I thought I saw movement. The trailer shifting ever so slightly on its suspension, like something inside had shifted its weight. That was it for me. I drove the last 20 miles to the cold storage dock and handed over the paperwork. The manager signed for the load without question, but when I mentioned the scratches, he just nodded like he'd heard it before. "Yeah," he said, "you're not the first one to say that." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that sound, that slow, labored breathing, and the way the scratches looked like they came from both sides of the door. A week later, dispatch reassigned me to another route. When I asked about the trailer, they told me it was pulled from service for maintenance. But 2 nights ago, I saw it again. Parked behind the company lot, half buried in mist, frost glittering along the walls. Someone had welded over the rear doors. No numbers, no markings, no entry allowed. I walked up to it, just close enough to see the frost shifting slightly near the seam. Not melting, moving, like something was breathing behind the steel. I left right then, and I can't stop wondering, if the last guy quit after hearing breathing, what happened to the one before him? Because whatever's inside that trailer, it's still cold and it's still alive enough to want out. It was a little after 3 a.m. when I pulled off Highway 23 into a rest area somewhere north of Norton, Virginia. I'd been hauling timber out of Wise County since late afternoon, and the fog had thickened so much it felt like driving through milk. My eyes burned from the high beams bouncing off it. I needed to stretch, maybe grab a few hours of sleep before dawn. The rest area was empty except for one other rig, a red Freightliner parked a few spots down. Its headlights were still on, cutting through the mist, and the passenger door hung wide open. The engine wasn't running, but the cab light glowed like a lantern in the fog. I pulled in 2 spaces over and shut down. The silence hit hard. No crickets, no highway hum, just the faint pinging of my engine cooling. The air was heavy with rain and diesel. I remember standing there for a minute, just listening, watching my breath drift white in the cold. The truck next to me looked recently used, still warm air spilling from the open door. A CB radio crackled faintly inside, the kind of static that seems to whisper words if you listen too long. I called out, "Hey, you all right in there?" No answer. I climbed up on the side rail to get a look inside. The driver's seat was empty, keys still in the ignition, headlights switched to on. A thermos sat in the cup holder, half full, still steaming faintly. The dashboard was cluttered, an old family photo, a worn pair of gloves, a folded logbook. The last entry caught my eye. I don't know why I read it. Maybe curiosity, maybe just something to focus on in that thick silence. 3:02 a.m. Pulled over. Rest area 214. Fog's too thick to drive. It's walking between the trucks again. I froze. The handwriting was shaky, rushed, like whoever wrote it was looking over their shoulder. I stared at that sentence, half expecting it to mean something obvious, like maybe another driver was moving around the lot. But the lot was empty. My headlights didn't even catch movement. I called out again, louder this time, my voice bouncing off the concrete picnic shelter nearby. "Hey, you out here?" Nothing. I checked the men's restroom. Dark, damp, the smell of mold and stale urine. No one inside. The vending machine area was lit, flickering. One of the candy bars was halfway dropped, jammed against the glass. The sound of the fluorescent light buzzing was louder than it should have been. When I came back out, the fog had thickened so much I could barely see my own truck. But I could still hear something, a slow, wet crunch of gravel. Not walking, exactly, more like dragging. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint it. It stopped when I moved. Started again when I stood still. After a while, I convinced myself it was just runoff from the hillside above the lot. Water rolling down and hitting the gravel. But the sound had rhythm. Step, drag, step, drag. I got back in my cab, locked the doors, and sat for a long time listening to the heater, fan. The fog outside pulsed with my running lights, orange glow fading in and out. That's when I noticed the logbook again, still sitting in the other truck's cab, still open. I don't know what made me do it, but I leaned over and shut my headlights off, plunging everything into near darkness except that other truck's glowing cab. The fog seemed to shift around it, like something was moving just outside the beam. And then, the CB in my truck hissed. A voice, barely audible, cut through. "You see it too?" I froze. Reached for the mic, but before I could say anything, the channel went dead. The only sound left was the low hum of my heater, and that dragging sound fading back into the mist. I didn't sleep. I just sat there until the fog started to lift and the first blue light of dawn hit the parking lot. By then, the red Freightliner's lights had finally gone out, and its door was closed. By mid-morning, I was still sitting there, running on caffeine and nerves. No sign of anyone returning to the red truck. I finally decided I should at least make sure someone knew. It could have been stolen, or worse. I called the state patrol. They said they'd send someone to check it out. Told me to stay put until they arrived. While I waited, I walked a slow loop around the lot. Everything looked normal again under daylight. The fog had burned off, leaving behind that damp smell of wet leaves and old pavement. The only odd thing was a line of footprints in the mud between the trucks, bare footprints, adult-sized, leading from behind the restroom right up to the Freightliner's cab and stopping there. No prints leading away. I crouched down to look closer. They weren't deep, more like someone had been walking slowly, almost cautiously. The last one, right under the open door, was smeared forward, like the person had been pulled up suddenly. I backed away from it. My chest felt tight. When the trooper arrived, middle-aged guy, looked tired. He gave me a nod and went to check the truck. I stood off to the side, feeling like a kid caught somewhere he shouldn't be. He looked inside for a long time, then came back holding the logbook. "Belong to you?" he asked. I shook my head. He flipped it open. His eyes skimmed the last page. "This what you found?" "Yeah," I said. "That's how I found it. The door was open, lights on. I didn't touch anything else." He looked back at the truck, then at me. "You see anyone?" "No, but I heard something," I said quietly, "like someone walking out there in the fog." He studied me for a few seconds. Then he said, "You'd be surprised how often people disappear out here. Sleep deprivation, weather, paranoia. Mountains can mess with your head." He radioed something in, then told me I could go. I started my rig, relieved to finally leave, but as I pulled out, I glanced at the Freightliner one last time. The trooper was still standing there, staring at the ground, between our trucks. 2 nights later, I stopped at another rest area farther south, near Pound Gap. It was raining hard again, fog rolling low across the lot. I didn't think much of it until I noticed something familiar. The faint orange glow of running lights through the mist. A red Freightliner, same make, same color. I slowed down, heart pounding, and saw a shape move in front of its headlights. Just a quick flicker of something human. But when I pulled closer, there was no one there. Only 2 sets of fresh footprints between the trucks, bare feet again. That night, I parked miles away from any rest area, and I still can't stop replaying that logbook entry in my head. It's walking between the trucks again. I used to think it was just a man out there, maybe lost, maybe delusional. But sometimes, when I pull off for the night and kill my engine, I swear I hear it again. That slow drag through the gravel, that weight shifting just beyond the light. And I can't bring myself to open my door, not even to breathe fresh air. Because whatever he saw out there, whatever took him, it's still walking between the trucks. I've been driving rigs for 15 years, long enough to know that the road itself can start to feel alive if you spend too many nights on it. The hum of the tires, the white lines sliding by, the wind pressing against the mirrors. It gets inside your head. You start hearing things. Seeing things too if you're tired enough. That's what I told myself that night. I was hauling a refrigerated load from the Texas border up to Roanoke. The paperwork said it was medical equipment, but the seal on the trailer was military grade. No company name. Just a barcode. The dispatcher didn't say much either, just that the client paid cash and wanted no delays. I'd had worse gigs, so I signed and rolled out. The first half of the trip was uneventful. I crossed into Tennessee before the rain started. By the time I hit the Blue Ridge foothills, the fog was so thick my high beams made it worse, like trying to drive through milk. The road twisted tighter with every mile, and my GPS kept freezing, rerouting itself down side roads that didn't exist. I figured it was just bad service. Around midnight, I pulled into a rest stop outside of Asheville. One of those old ones with half the lights burned out and vending machines from the 90s. The rain had turned into a slow drizzle, and everything smelled like wet pine and diesel. I left the engine idling, stepped out, and lit a cigarette under the awning. That's when I heard it. A voice came through my CB radio, clear as if the guy was sitting beside me. "Evenin', Mike." It said my name, my full name. I froze halfway through my drag. My CB wasn't even on. The dial was turned all the way down, the little green light off. I climbed back into the cab, checked the power, still off. But the voice came again, softer this time, like it was slipping between channels. "You picked her up late. Everything all right back there?" I just sat there, staring at the silent radio. The voice was male, calm, slow drawl, maybe mid-40s, the kind of tone that sounds friendly until you realize you've never heard it before. I flicked the CB off completely, even pulled the power cord. Silence. For the rest of the night, I tried to convince myself it was some random signal bleeding through. That happens sometimes on older rigs. The mountains bounce the frequencies. But the voice hadn't asked about the weather or traffic. It asked about my load. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the seal on the trailer and how heavy it felt on the inclines. By dawn, the fog hadn't lifted. It had thickened. It clung to the truck like smoke. When I got back on the road, the voice returned. "Heading through Boone now, ain't ya?" I slammed the brakes, heart pounding. Boone was at least 50 miles ahead. No one should have known my route. My GPS was off, my CB disconnected. I looked into the rearview mirrors. The fog had swallowed the world behind me. No headlights, no taillights, just gray. That's when I noticed something strange. On the inside of my windshield at the bottom right corner, a faint handprint, smudged like someone had pressed their palm against the glass from inside. By the time I reached Boone, I was shaking from caffeine and no sleep. The fog thinned into low clouds, but the rain kept coming steady. I pulled into a truck stop, empty except for one rusted Peterbilt with its hood up. I parked a few lanes over and just sat there, trying to breathe. The CB was unplugged, but that didn't matter anymore. The voice didn't need it. "You're getting close now, Mike. They don't like when folks peek." It came from the speakers again, quiet but clear. I yanked the fuse from the dash, killing every radio component I could. Still, I heard breathing, faint, wet, slow, leaking through the speakers. I stepped out into the rain and went straight to the trailer. The metal doors were slick and cold, dripping condensation from the refrigeration unit. I checked the seal again, still intact. I thought about cutting it open just to see. Maybe I'd find medical crates like the paperwork said. Maybe I'd find something worse, but fear does strange things. It keeps you moving even when you don't believe in what you're doing. I didn't cut the seal. I got back in the cab, started the engine, and merged back onto the mountain road. The voice followed. "Ain't right, keeping her locked like that." The "her" made my stomach twist. Every time the truck groaned through a curve, I swore I could hear shifting from the trailer. Not cargo, weight, movement. Like something adjusting itself to stay upright. I told myself it was the suspension, the cold air, the slope of the road. Anything but what it sounded like. At a pull-off near a hollow called Stony Fork, I stopped again. The rain had turned to mist, the trees dripping with it, branches hanging low like fingers. The woods were dead silent. No birds, no insects, just the hiss of my engine cooling. I walked around back once more, flashlight in hand. My boots sank in the mud. The beam of light cut across the back doors, and for a moment I saw something. A dent, small, almost circular, like a fist had struck the inside of the metal. Then the CB crackled again, faint but sharp. "You should have kept driving, Mike." The voice wasn't calm anymore. It was low, urgent. I stumbled backward, dropped the flashlight, and it landed beam up in the mud. The trailer door shuddered, just once, and then went still. I don't remember much after that. I must have gotten back in the cab and started driving again because when I came to, I was 30 miles up the road. My hands were locked on the wheel. The fog was thicker than ever, and my windshield wipers were frozen mid-swipe. The CB speaker was dead silent, but the windshield had changed. The handprint from before was gone, replaced by something else. A smear. Long, thin, streaks of moisture dragged down the glass from inside, like fingertips sliding slowly down. I delivered the load in Roanoke the next morning. The receiver didn't say a word, just scanned the barcode, nodded, and drove the trailer away. When I asked what was inside, he looked at me like he hadn't heard the question. That was 6 months ago. I still drive, though I stay west now. No more Appalachian runs. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and the road goes quiet, I hear static creeping through the speakers. And then softly, like a breath on glass, Evening, Mike. I've been driving trucks for 23 years, long enough to know that the mountains can mess with your head. They hold sound differently, like everything echoes and swallows itself at once. You can hear your own engine a mile back behind you, and the fog, when it's thick, turns your headlights into dull orange halos that barely touch the road. It was late October when I got routed through the Appalachians, a run from Knoxville to Roanoke. I'd taken that route plenty of times before, but this time felt different from the start. Rain had been falling on and off for days, and the mist seemed to cling to the mountain like old smoke. Around 1 a.m., I passed a turnout, one of those gravel pull-offs carved into the slope, and I saw her. A woman, standing by the guardrail. She wore a pale blue jacket, the kind with white stripes down the arms. Her jeans looked soaked at the hems. She wasn't waving for help or even moving, just standing there, facing the road, her eyes catching the reflection from my headlights. I thought about stopping, I really did, but that stretch of 251 is tight and slick, and stopping a 40-ton rig on a downhill curve isn't something you do unless you're ready to lose it. So I drove on. Still, she bothered me. When I came around the next bend, maybe 5 miles later, there she was again. Same jacket, same posture, just standing at the edge of another turnout, staring straight at my cab. I slowed down this time, heart pounding against the steering wheel, but when I looked in the side mirror, she was gone. The radio crackled, the CB chatter I usually keep on low. Channel 19, full of night drivers keeping each other awake. But all I heard was static, with a faint voice buried under it, like someone trying to talk through a bad connection. I turned it down and kept driving. Every few miles another turnout. Same figure, sometimes closer to the road. Once she was on my side, less than 20 feet from the lane, and I swear she turned her head slowly as I passed, following me with her eyes. By the time I hit the state line, I'd convinced myself it was my imagination. Long hours, no sleep, the road playing tricks again. I parked at an old rest stop outside Floyd County, the kind with broken vending machines and one working light buzzing over the bathroom door. The rain stopped sometime before dawn. I slept a few hours in the cab, then got coffee from my thermos and checked my route map. When I turned on the small TV mounted above the dash, the local channel flickered on through the static. The morning news anchor was reading off missing persons updates from the region. Small towns, faces from grainy photos. But then I saw her, same blue jacket, same cold stare. Missing since September 1997, last seen near the Blue Ridge Parkway. The photo was old, yellowed at the edges. The anchor moved on to the next story, but I just sat there, staring at that frozen image on the screen. The date hit me like a brake release, 1997. That was almost 30 years ago. I shut off the TV and stepped outside. The air smelled of wet leaves and diesel. Birds were starting to wake. But as I looked across the lot, toward the entrance to the old mountain road I'd just driven, I noticed something pressed against the guardrail near the turnout sign, a blue piece of fabric fluttering in the breeze. I thought it was just trash at first, until I saw the white stripes down the sleeve. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not fear, exactly, just a hollow, heavy kind of silence that seemed to settle in my chest. I didn't touch it. I didn't call anyone. I just got back in the cab, started the engine, and kept driving east, but I couldn't stop seeing her. Every reflection in my mirror, every patch of fog that shifted against the glass. I didn't take that road again for nearly 2 years, but when the company sent me another run through the Appalachians, I didn't argue. I told myself it had been exhaustion, that what I saw wasn't real. Maybe the photo on TV just looked similar. People want to believe patterns in things they can't explain. Still, I left earlier than usual that night, hoping to cross the ridge before the fog rolled in. By the time I hit Boone, the sky was a dull gray, like the whole world had gone colorless. Rain had started again. Slow, heavy drops that hit the windshield like taps from a fingernail. Somewhere past Laurel Fork, I saw the first turnout. Empty, then another. Empty again. But I couldn't shake that feeling that someone was watching from the tree line, a presence quiet and patient. Every few miles I'd flick my high beams just to check. At one point I stopped for a break near an old service station that had been abandoned for decades. The pump handles were gone, and vines had grown up the sides of the building. Inside, through the cracked window, I saw an old notice board with yellowed flyers. Community dance. For sale. Missing. That last one stopped me cold. It was her again. Same name, same photo as before, but the date on the paper looked fresher, printed in bold ink that hadn't yet faded. Someone had reposted it. I went back to my truck without even realizing I'd started to shake. The rain thickened into a steady sheet, hammering on the roof as I pulled out of the lot. About 10 miles later, I saw movement ahead, something pale by the side of the road. I slowed down. It wasn't a person this time. It was a small wooden cross nailed into the dirt, the kind truckers sometimes set up after accidents. A few plastic flowers had washed halfway down the slope. On the cross was a name, hers again. Sarah Miller, 1973-1997. There were tire tracks carved into the mud just past it. Fresh ones, not mine. That was when I noticed the smell, faint but sharp, like burnt oil and wet iron. The kind of smell that sticks to your clothes. I rolled the window up, but it was already in the cab. By the time I reached the next town, my hands were trembling on the wheel. I pulled into a diner near a truck stop to steady myself. Inside, the place was nearly empty except for an older waitress who moved slow, like every motion hurt. She poured me coffee and asked if I was driving through the ridge. When I nodded, she said quietly, "You be careful up there. That road's taken more people than it should." I wanted to ask her about Sarah, to see if she knew the story, but something stopped me. The way she looked at me, like she already knew what I'd seen. I left cash on the counter and stepped back outside. The rain had let up, but the air was thick and warm, and the smell of earth clung to everything. Before I climbed back into the cab, I noticed muddy footprints leading up to my driver's door. Small ones. Barefoot. No one was around. I wiped them away with my boot and told myself they'd been there before, that I just hadn't noticed. That was years ago now. But sometimes when I drive that route again, I still see her. Not on the turnouts anymore, but in reflections. A shape that lingers for half a second longer than it should. I never see her face clearly, but I don't need to. I know the jacket, I know the stare, and I know that somewhere along that road, someone stopped when I didn't. And she's still waiting for a ride home. They told me it was an emergency medical haul. That's all I knew. I've been hauling loads through the Appalachians for 23 years. Seen plenty of weird contracts, military transports, chemical tankers, refrigerated medical units. This one felt different from the start. The dispatcher didn't even give me a pickup address until an hour before departure. Just coordinates somewhere past Blue Hollow, up a dirt road I'd never noticed before. When I got there, fog was sitting low in the valley like breath trapped between the ridges. The facility, if you could call it that, looked like an old tobacco warehouse converted for storage. Rusted metal siding, floodlights that flickered, a muddy gravel lot with no other trucks. A man in a gray windbreaker met me at the gate. No name, no small talk. He had that government feel, polite but cold, efficient in a way that made you feel small. He said, "You'll be hauling a sealed container. Do not open it. Do not stop until you reach the drop point in Knoxville. Medical materials, temperature sensitive, understood?" I nodded. I'd heard that tone before. Military men or men pretending to be. He handed me a clipboard with half the pages blacked out. The container was the size of a coffin, matte white, with a steel lock system I hadn't seen before. They loaded it into my trailer with a forklift. I felt the truck sink slightly, heavier than I expected. Before I left, the man leaned in through the window and said, "No stops. No matter what you hear, keep going." That phrasing stuck with me. What you hear. I left the site around dusk. Rain followed me down the winding roads, soft at first, then heavier the deeper I got into the hills. My headlights stretched thin through the mist. Every few miles I'd lose signal, radio static crawling in like whispers through the speakers. By midnight, the road narrowed into an old two-lane cutting between trees that seemed too close together. The asphalt was wet and black, like a strip of oil in the forest. That's when I first heard it. A soft thud from the trailer. I slowed, checked my mirrors. Everything looked still, but the sound came again, sharper this time, like someone knocking, polite but firm. I pulled onto the shoulder for a second, engine idling. The rain eased off, and in the silence I could hear it clearly, 3 knocks, spaced evenly apart. I climbed down, flashlight in hand. My boots sank in the mud as I circled the trailer. The container was still there, sealed, no movement. The locks looked untouched. But then I realized something. The knocks had stopped as soon as I stepped out. I stood there for a long moment, flashlight trembling just slightly in my hand. The woods around me were silent. Too silent. No crickets, no wind. Just the slow dripping of rain from the pines. I got back in and kept driving. Around 1:30 a.m. I started hearing it again. Not knocking this time, more like tapping. And something faint underneath it, breathing, maybe. A low rasp, in and out, in rhythm with my own. I turned the radio on for distraction, but all I got was static. Somewhere in that static I thought I heard a voice, my own voice, whispering, "Don't stop." I killed the radio immediately. By the time I reached the Tennessee line, my hands were shaking on the wheel. I told myself it was the rain, the isolation, the way the fog played tricks on sound. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. When I stopped for gas just outside of Fair Hollow, I hesitated before turning off the engine. My orders were clear, no stops, but I needed a minute. As I sat there, engine humming, I heard a muffled whisper through the sleeper vent behind me. It said my name. That's when I realized it wasn't the fog, or the static, or the wind. Whatever was inside that container knew who I was. I don't remember deciding to open the trailer. I just remember stepping out into the damp, cold air behind the gas station and walking back toward it, a flashlight cutting through the fog like a blade. The rain had stopped, but everything still dripped. The awning, the sign, my jacket. I could hear the distant hum of the highway and nothing else. When I reached the back of the trailer, I heard it again. My name, clear this time, spoken softly, like through glass. "Eddie." The voice was mine. I froze. My breath fogged the air. Then came another sound. Not a knock this time, but something like a hand brushing the metal from the inside. Slow, dragging fingertips. "Eddie, don't leave me in here." I dropped the flashlight. It landed in a puddle, beam swinging wildly across the side of the container. For a second, I saw a faint impression against the wall, the shape of a hand pressing out from within. I wanted to run, but curiosity, or guilt, rooted me in place. When I finally backed away, I saw something that almost made me drop to my knees. The identification sticker on the container had peeled in the rain, exposing faint black marker underneath. It wasn't a shipping code, it was a name, my last name. Carver. I stumbled back to the cab and slammed the door shut, heart pounding like a hammer. I didn't start the engine, I just sat there, staring at the rain-spotted windshield, trying to piece together how my name could be written on that thing. Then I remembered something I'd spent years trying to forget. A convoy accident, back when I was deployed overseas. An overturned transport. Screaming from inside a burning container that I couldn't get open in time. The official report said no survivors, but I'd always wondered about that. As I sat there, staring into the dark, I heard the voice again. Calm now, closer. You left me there, Eddie. I turned. The sleeper curtain was half open, swaying slightly though the windows were closed. Open it, the voice said. Finish what you started. I snapped the ignition, flooring it out of the lot. The truck roared up the wet road, gears whining. I kept my eyes straight, refusing to look in the mirrors, but the knocks came back, faster, harder, like the fists pounding the inside of the trailer. Let me out. Please, Eddie. Then quieter. I'm cold. The mountain roads twisted like veins through the fog, and I drove until the sun started bleeding through the clouds. When I finally reached Knoxville, the drop point was nothing more than an empty lot with a rusted gate and a trailer office. No signs, no personnel. No one there to take the load. I waited for hours before unhooking the trailer and leaving it there. I didn't care about the paycheck or the company. I just wanted to go home. For days after, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing tapping behind the walls of my house. Sometimes, when I turned off the TV, I'd catch a faint whisper through the static, my own voice, asking to be let out. 2 weeks later, I checked the route map online. The container had been received. No further details. That was 6 months ago. Last night, a new job came through. Another emergency medical transport. The pickup address was the same place, up that same dirt road past Blue Hollow. And this morning, taped to my windshield, was a folded sheet of paper with one line written on it. No stops, no matter what you hear. The ink was smudged, like it had been written in the rain. I've been hauling freight through the Appalachian corridor for 23 years. You learn to respect the land out here, the way fog rolls in like something alive, how silence carries further than sound, and how night can feel heavier in the hollows than anywhere else on Earth. That night, I was running an empty trailer north on Route 89, somewhere between Norton and Pound. It was one of those stretches where you can go 50 miles without seeing a single gas station. Just trees pressing in from both sides, and the occasional half-collapsed barn trying to hold itself together. The rain had stopped a few hours before, but the air still smelled like wet bark and diesel. It was around midnight when I first saw the red sedan. A compact model, older, maybe late 90s. Paint dull, tail lights dim and flickering. I was doing 60, coming down off a grade when I caught up to it. It was slow, maybe 45, and hugging the center line like the driver couldn't decide which lane was his. I flashed my brights, tapped the horn once. No reaction. The driver didn't move, didn't even glance in the mirror, just kept that steady crawl through the mist. When I passed, I glanced into the cab. He was sitting stiff as a board, hands at 10 and 2, eyes locked dead ahead. I couldn't see his face well, but what struck me was how motionless he was. No nods, no shift of the head, nothing, like he was carved into the seat. I told myself Maybe he was tired, zoned out. Happens to all of us. I put it out of my head and kept rolling. 2 hours later, I stopped at a turnout to stretch and grab a coffee from my thermos. I left the truck idling, old habit when the air's cold, and listened to the hiss of the engine against the quiet. Out here, you don't get the hum of power lines or far-off highway noise. Just frogs, the occasional owl, and your own heartbeat. When I climbed back in and pulled out, the road curved through a narrow stretch of fog, and there it was again. The same red sedan moving just ahead of me like it had never stopped. Same cracked rear bumper, same fading dealership sticker from Knoxville. I slowed down, heart thumping. Maybe I'd looped back somehow, missed a turn. But Route 89 doesn't have loops. It's one long artery through mountains and mining towns that barely exist anymore. I pushed the accelerator, pulled alongside again. Same man, same posture. Eyes forward, hands locked. I honked twice this time. Still no movement. The road opened into a long straightaway, and I passed him for the second time. My mirrors showed his headlights shrinking in the distance until the fog swallowed them. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe there were two similar cars, same model, same color. But even as I thought it, I didn't believe it. At mile marker 173, I stopped again. This time at an abandoned rest stop I'd used years ago. Roof half collapsed, vending machines gutted, picnic tables slick with moss. The smell of rot was strong, mixed with the metallic tang of wet concrete. I parked under a busted light post and shut the engine off. It was so quiet it hurt. I climbed into the sleeper to catch an hour's rest. My radio hissed with static when I tried to tune into channel 19. No chatter, no trucker talk, just that faint hiss, like breathing through gravel. I must have dozed because when I woke, my cab windows were fogged from the inside. My heart jumped before my mind caught up. I wiped a circle clear with my hand and froze. Headlights. Out there, on the far side of the lot, the red sedan sat idling. Its beams cut through the mist, white and steady. But there was no sound, no engine, just light. I waited, 10 minutes, maybe more, never saw the driver get out, never saw movement. When I blinked, the lights seemed further away. When I blinked again, they were gone. That was when I decided to drive straight through to Ashland. I didn't care how tired I was. Something about that car, it felt wrong. Not ghostly or supernatural, just wrong in a human way. I rolled back onto Route 89 with my high beams on, and for a while it was just me and the road again. The mountains pressed close, the rain started up again, and I told myself it was just fatigue, hallucinations. I'd been on the road too long, but when the next bend straightened out, the red sedan was there again, 50 yards ahead, crawling. Same cracked bumper, same man, still not moving. That's when my hands started shaking. By the time dawn broke, I was running on fumes, both gas and sleep. The fog had thinned into low, ragged wisps that clung to the tree line. The road curved endlessly, climbing and falling through the mountains like a snake that didn't want to end. The red sedan was still there. No matter what I did, pass him, stop for an hour, take the old mining road detour, he was always back ahead of me, like the world folded around that car. At one point, I pulled off near a logging site to test myself, killed the engine, sat in the cab with my logbook open, counting minutes. 45 passed, no cars, no sound except dripping leaves and a distant chainsaw echo that might have just been wind. When I eased back onto the road, the sedan was parked 50 yards ahead on the shoulder. This time, it wasn't moving. My first instinct was to radio for help, but I knew how that'd sound. Some guy won't stop following me except he's always in front. they'd chalk it up to exhaustion. So I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down. The mud sucked at my boots as I walked toward it. I kept calling out, "Hey, you okay?" But the fog made my voice feel small. When I reached the driver's window, my light hit glass that was fogged from the inside, just like my own cab earlier. The figure inside sat upright, head tilted slightly toward the windshield. I knocked on the glass. Nothing. My stomach twisted. I tried the handle, locked. I circled to the front, half expecting him to suddenly move, to turn his head or blink. But when I leaned close, I realized I couldn't see his eyes at all. The windshield was dirty, smeared with condensation and grime, but I could tell his face wasn't facing me anymore. It was angled downward, chin to chest. I whispered, "Jesus," and stepped back. That's when I saw the plates, Tennessee tags, expired since 2009. There was a sticker on the rear bumper, half peeled away, same one I'd noticed earlier. But under the grime I could just make out the words, "In memory of Dale." I didn't understand what I was looking at. My pulse was hammering, and part of me knew I shouldn't touch the door again, but I did. I yanked it harder this time. The sound that came out wasn't metal, it was soft, wet. The door opened an inch, then stopped, and from the gap the smell hit me, heavy, sweet, and wrong. I stumbled back and ran for my truck. I didn't look again, not when I started the engine, not when my headlights swept past the car, not when I saw that the man's head had turned ever so slightly toward me. I drove until the sun was high, and the radio finally caught a signal again. Somewhere near Harlan, I pulled into a diner and called the state police, told them where to look. They said they'd send someone out, and that was the end of it. Except a week later, I called back to ask what they'd found. The officer on the line paused for a long time before saying, "There's no record of any vehicle matching that description. Are you sure it was on Route 89? I said yes. I knew what I'd seen. That was 6 years ago. I still drive the same routes, still haul through those mountains. But every now and then, when the fog sets low and my lights catch the wet blacktop just right, I see a pair of dim taillights ahead. Same distance, same red glow. And I swear, sometimes they slow down, just enough to let me catch up." I'd been driving since dawn, running a load of steel pipes from Knoxville to a construction yard near Charleston. My logbook was already stretched thin, and the rain had been coming down in slow, needling sheets since afternoon. By the time I reached the ridgeline near Beckley, my eyes were stinging from the wiper's endless rhythm. I checked my hours. Gone. I needed to park. But every turnout I passed was full of other rigs or washed out from the rain. I didn't want to risk a fine, so when I spotted a faded green sign half swallowed by vines that read, "Old Timber Service D, no outlet," I figured it'd do. The road was narrow, overgrown, and the kind of quiet that makes you roll down the window just to check if your ears still work. I eased the truck down a quarter mile until the trees closed in like a tunnel. Found a flat patch of gravel beside what looked like an old pull-off, maybe used decades ago for logging. No other lights, no cell signal, just fog and rain whispering through the pines. I killed the engine. The silence that followed was thick, like something pressing on my chest. I left the dash lights on for a minute, staring at the glowing clock. 11:42 p.m. The rain tapped soft against the windshield. The air smelled like wet bark and something else. Sweet, but sour underneath. Rot, maybe. I climbed into the sleeper, pulled the curtain, and tried to ignore the faint sound of water dripping somewhere inside the cab. Sleep came slow. My mind kept replaying the last few miles. Those old rusted mailboxes, the empty field with a single collapsed barn. I remember wondering how long it had been since anyone used that road. At some point, I must have drifted off. When I woke, it was still dark, but quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that tells you something's changed. My watch said 3:17 a.m. The rain had stopped. No wind, no insects. Just that hollow, thick stillness. I sat up, instinctively checking the side mirrors. Nothing. The fog outside was so heavy it looked solid, like milk glass pressed against the glass. I didn't know why, but I felt my pulse start to climb. I grabbed my flashlight and cracked the driver's door, half expecting to hear the night rush in. But it didn't. The world outside just hung there, heavy and wet. Then I saw them. Footprints. Bare, human footprints. Clear as day, pressed into the thin film of mud around the truck. They started a few feet from the back tire and circled the entire rig. Slow, deliberate steps, one after another, until they reached the driver's side door and stopped. The ground below my door was stamped deep, like whoever it was had stood there for a while. Watching. I swept the light out across the fog. Nothing but the pale outlines of trees. The beam caught on raindrops and mist, but no shapes, no movement. Just the footprints. My stomach twisted. The mud was cold when I crouched to look closer, and the prints were clean. No signs of shoes, no animal tracks, no drag marks, just toes, heels, flesh. I stood up, scanning the cab again, door handle dry, windows locked, nothing inside disturbed. But that smell, that sour-sweet rot, was stronger now. I turned the light toward the tree line, and for a split second I thought I saw something pale among the trees. A face, maybe, or just the fog shifting. When I looked again, it was gone. I shut the door and locked it, my hands trembling harder than I'd like to admit. Sat there in the driver's seat, engine off, lights off, listening to my own breathing. Every sound outside seemed magnified, the drip of condensation off the mirrors, the soft crack of branches. I stayed awake till the horizon started to pale gray. When daylight finally came, the prints were still there, dozens of them, some already filling with water from the morning dew. But now I could see something else. A second set. Smaller, fainter. Those led away from the truck, back toward the woods. By morning, the fog had lifted just enough to show me how far I'd driven in. The service road curved uphill into thick trees, then disappeared around a bend. No houses, no power lines, just forest. I thought about leaving right then, but curiosity or maybe disbelief kept me from firing up the rig. I needed to see where those footprints went. Maybe a kid, a hiker lost in the storm, maybe something explainable. I followed them. The smaller prints were uneven, lighter, like someone half running, barefoot on cold ground. They weaved through the brush before vanishing near a cluster of fallen birches. The ground there looked disturbed, the way soft dirt shifts after rain. The smell was back, stronger. Sweet rot, like meat left out too long. I covered my nose and squatted down. There were scraps of fabric half buried in the mud. Thin cotton, striped. Looked like part of a shirt. That's when I noticed the rusted metal stake sticking out of the ground. Bent, half-eaten by time, with a piece of rope still tied around it. I don't know why, but something in me went cold. I backed away, scanning the ground, and saw more. Little shards of glass, old beer cans, and what looked like the corner of a weathered license plate half sunk into the soil. There was a faint trail leading deeper, almost invisible until you were right on top of it. Against my better judgment, I followed. The woods were dead quiet, except for the sound of my boots sinking in mud. The trail sloped down into a shallow hollow where a stream used to run. In the center was a large piece of concrete, cracked in half like it had been dropped there years ago. Someone had carved letters into it, but they were almost gone. All I could make out were the first three, show, before the rest disappeared into moss. I didn't need to see the rest. Shoals, maybe, or shoemaker. That's when I remembered the sign I'd passed miles back. Shoemaker, Hollow, Ard. An old story came back to me, something a dispatcher once mentioned, about a missing mother and daughter from down near Beckley. Their car, found burned out off an old service road, never found the bodies. The prints, the small ones. My chest tightened. I turned back toward the rig, walking fast now. The air felt thicker, like the forest was closing in. When I reached the clearing again, I saw the footprints, fresh ones, beside the truck. Mine and others. They weren't there before. The mud around the cab was churned up now, smeared, like someone had been pacing again. The passenger door handle was streaked with dirt, and there was a single, faint handprint on the glass. Small. I froze. Then something thudded softly from inside the sleeper. Just one sound, muffled. I didn't open it. I don't know why, I just couldn't. I stood there for what felt like an hour, staring at the cab, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I finally did climb inside, everything was still. Empty. But the smell, God, the smell, had seeped into the upholstery. Sweet, rotten, metallic. I drove out without checking the mirrors, without looking back at the trees closing behind me. It wasn't until I stopped at a truck stop outside Summersville later that afternoon that I finally looked. Mud still clung to the steps, the tires, even the side door. But something else caught my eye on the lower panel. Faint streaks of brown, like someone had run their fingers through wet dirt and dragged them down the metal. 5 lines. I scrubbed them off with the squeegee by the pump, but they wouldn't come clean. Even now, months later, I swear I still see them when the light hits just right. I never took that road again. But sometimes when I park at night, I wake up for no reason, just this cold feeling in my chest, and every time before I start the engine, I check the ground outside my door, just to be sure. I'd only been driving long haul for 4 months when it happened. The company had me running eastbound through the Appalachian foothills, cutting from Kentucky toward Virginia, following a narrow highway that curled between black ridges and hollow valleys. It was late September. Cold mist hung low to the ground, the kind that made the trees look like ghosts climbing out of the dirt. My dispatcher warned me about that stretch. Poor radio signal, bad reception, and wait stations that sometimes weren't even marked right on the GPS. Still, I had to pull into one around mile marker 73. My log showed a mandatory check-in, and I was already on thin ice after a few rookie mistakes earlier that week. The road sloped down into a clearing, where the fog opened just enough to show the outline of a small, single-story building. Its floodlights were weak, flickering yellow through the mist. A sign out front read, State Inspection Station, though the paint had peeled so badly you could barely read it. I rolled onto the scale pad, air brakes sighing. The radio crackled with static, then a voice, dry, deliberate, said, "Driver, pull around to the back bay for inspection." The voice startled me because I hadn't seen anyone outside, but I did as told, circling the side of the building until I reached the back. A single door was cracked open, light leaking out. Inside, it smelled like wet paper and diesel. The floors were checkered linoleum, yellowed and curling at the edges. I remember my boots sticking slightly as I walked toward the counter. There was a man sitting behind it, tall, thin, pale. His uniform was clean but outdated, the old gray patch with the state emblem half faded on the sleeve. He didn't look up when I came in, just held out his hand without saying a word. I passed him my paperwork. He studied it for a while, motionless, pen scratching faintly. His hands were thin and colorless, veins blue beneath the skin. I thought maybe he was sick. "You knew?" he finally asked. "Yeah," I said. "Been at it a few months." He nodded once, slow, and pointed toward the bay doors. "Pop your trailer. I'll take a look." When I stepped outside, the fog had thickened. The mountains around me were silent. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Just the low hum of my engine. I unlatched the trailer and waited. He never came out. After a few minutes, I peeked back inside. The counter was empty. My paperwork lay neatly stacked, a red stamp across the top that said, "Cleared." "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed through the empty building. No answer. I walked a little deeper inside. The inspection bay was cluttered with old office chairs, broken monitors, and filing cabinets left half open. The smell of mold was stronger now, like rain-soaked wood. I noticed the clock on the wall had stopped at 3:17. When I finally got back in my cab, the air inside felt warmer, safer. I pulled onto the road, watching the way. Station fade in the mirrors. I told myself the guy probably stepped out back or went to the restroom. But something still bothered me. His eyes. The way he looked at my license like it meant something more than it should have. And how, when I think back, I can't recall ever hearing the sound of his breathing. Not once. That night, I parked at a rest area just past the Virginia border. It was raining hard by then, thunder crawling through the hills. My windshield wipers kept time with the lightning, and the storm made sleep impossible. Out of boredom, I started reviewing footage from my dash cam. I'd installed it myself. A cheap model that recorded in loops. It was mounted on the dash, angled to capture both the road and the way stations for insurance. I watched the playback of me rolling into the inspection station. The screen flickered slightly with interference, probably from the fog. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m. The camera showed me stopping on the scale, headlights cutting through the mist. But there was no light from the station itself, no flickering floodlights, no glow from the windows. The building looked darker, completely dark. Then came the part where I remembered hearing the voice. On the footage, the CB radio stayed silent. Just static. I kept watching. When I drove around to the back, the video showed a shadow of the building, roof sagging, walls covered in ivy. The door I walked through was boarded shut. My chest tightened. I skipped forward in the footage, to the moment I came back out. There was no light, no door, just me, stepping through fog, talking to no one. My lips moved like I was speaking, but the cab mic caught only silence. I felt sick watching it. The camera wasn't malfunctioning, the clarity was too good. Every detail was visible, just wrong. I checked my paperwork next. The red stamp, "Cleared," was still there, but the signature line was blank. I tried to call my dispatcher to ask if that station was even active, but there was no signal, not even a single bar. So I waited till morning, parked by a small diner when the roads dried out. Over coffee, I asked the waitress if she knew about a way station around mile 73. She frowned. "There was one," she said, "up till it burned down. 08 or 09, I think. Lightning storm took it out. Killed the officer on duty." I remember my hands shaking as she said it. I drove back through that area a week later, broad daylight this time. The road looked different. Smaller somehow, narrower. I slowed down at mile 73, half expecting to see that pale figure again. But all that was left was a cracked lot overrun with weeds. The old station had collapsed inward. The roof caved like a broken rib cage. I parked for a moment, engine idling, and looked through the windshield at the place I swore I'd walked through. There was no counter, no door, no light, just blackened wood and silence. I still have the paperwork in my glove box. I've shown it to a few other drivers, guys who've been running these mountains for years. They tell me the fog can mess with your head, make you see what you expect to see. But I remember the sound of his pen scratching on that paper, the smell of diesel, the way the fluorescent light flickered against the peeling linoleum. Sometimes, when I pass through the Appalachians and the fog starts to roll down the hills, I catch myself checking my mirrors, looking for that building again, waiting for that voice to come through the static. And when I do, my CB still clicks once, all on its own. Then silence. I was running a short haul that night, hauling lumber from Beckley down toward Asheville. The weather had turned quicker than the radio said it would. A hard Appalachian snow, thick as smoke and moving sideways. I'd taken the back stretch of Route 19 to avoid traffic, but by the time I hit the Blue Ridge foothills, the world had gone white. My wipers slapped uselessly against ice, and the CB was mostly static. I was alone on that road for what felt like hours. Then, sometime after midnight, a voice cracked through Channel 19. "Anyone out there, God, please, someone." It wasn't the usual trucker chatter. It sounded tight, panicked, like the guy was speaking through clenched teeth. "This is southbound on 19, I answered. "You in trouble, driver?" There was a pause, then a burst of static. "Slid off, near mile marker 73. I can't move my leg, please. Cab's crushed in." Then the radio cut dead. I stared at the receiver. The storm howled outside, snow piling against the windshield. Route 19 had few mile markers and fewer turnouts. But 73, that was a steep section with no guardrail and a drop-off toward a hollow I'd never liked driving through. Folks said it used to be a mining town down there before it was all swallowed by mud and weeds. I debated calling it in, but out there, cell service was spotty. The snowstorm was chewing through signal and power lines both. I kept thinking about that man's voice, at the raw panic in it, and how quick it had cut off. So I decided to go. I flipped on my hazards and eased south, scanning the edges of the road. The world had shrunk to my headlights, white snow, black trees, nothing else. Around 20 minutes later, I saw it, the faint shape of a guardrail bent inward, tire tracks vanishing over the edge. I braked hard, heart pounding, then climbed out into the cold. The wind screamed across the ridge, pushing needles of ice into my face. I followed the tracks down the embankment with my flashlight. About 20 feet below, through the whipping snow, I saw a truck lying nose down against a tangle of pine trunks. Its trailer had jackknifed, blocking most of the slope. The cab looked crushed in on the driver's side, glass spider-webbed, door half torn. I shouted, but my voice just vanished into the snow. When I finally reached the cab, I froze. Inside was a man, mid-40s maybe, face pale blue, eyes half open. He was slumped against the wheel, seatbelt still on. He looked gone, like he'd been there a while. The windshield was iced from the inside. The cab door wouldn't budge. I stepped back, shaking, trying to piece it together. That call had come through less than an hour ago. But this guy was stiff. His skin had that waxy look, the kind you only see after someone's been dead for hours, maybe longer. The snow thickened. I leaned close to the cracked window, my breath fogging the glass. The CB radio inside was hanging from its mount, cord, sliced clean through. Not frayed, cut. That's when I noticed something else. The faint smell seeping through the broken vent. Not exhaust or fuel, something sweet and wrong, like rot mixed with antifreeze. I stumbled back to my truck, my boots filling with snow. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the embankment, waiting for the courage to call it in. The dispatcher didn't answer. Neither did anyone else on 19, just static. Deep, constant, like wind through a long metal pipe. After a while, I thought I heard it again, that same voice. Faint, almost calm this time. "Thank you for coming." But when I picked up the mic, there was nothing. Just snow pressing against the glass and the hollow sound of my own breathing. By dawn, the storm had eased. A pale gray fog hung over the ridge, thick enough to hide the valley. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face. Frozen, colorless, staring through cracked glass. I radioed the county sheriff as soon as I got a signal. They sent a tow and a deputy from Summersville. By the time they arrived, the road looked untouched, my tire tracks nearly buried. We climbed down together. The wreck looked just like I'd left it, except quieter, heavier somehow. Deputy Carver squatted by the cab, shining a flashlight through the windshield. "That's Dale Roper," he said. "Used to run timber up through Wythe County. Been missing since early December." My stomach turned. It was February. Carver looked at me. "You say you got a call from him last night?" "Yeah," I said. "Just before midnight. Said he was stuck. Leg pinned. Gave his location. When I got here, he was like that, frozen, like he'd been there for days." The deputy's eyes narrowed. "Son, this truck's been here for over a month. We searched this ridge twice." I felt my throat close. That can't be right. He reached inside and pulled the CB mic through the shattered glass. The cord dangled loose, sliced clean. "We found this cut last time, must have snagged when it rolled." But it wasn't snagged. I'd seen it up close, a smooth, deliberate slice. They loaded the body out while I stood at the edge of the road watching my breath drift in the cold air. The sky looked bruised, the fog still thick in the hollow. I remember thinking how quiet it all was. No birds, no engines, not even the wind. When Carver came back, he handed me my ID, which I didn't remember giving him. "You ought to get some rest," he said. "Storm like that, folks see and hear all kinds of things." I didn't argue. I drove on. But halfway down the next stretch, I noticed something that made me pull over. The snow along the shoulder was marked with 2 sets of footprints, one mine, one smaller, running parallel, leading from where my truck had been parked the night before. They stopped at the guardrail, right where I'd gone down to the wreck. The smaller prints faced the road, not away from it. I stared at them for a long time until my vision blurred. Then I climbed back in the cab and drove until I hit the next town, where I parked at a diner and sat staring at my hands until the waitress asked if I was okay. I didn't tell her what happened. I just said I'd been driving too long in the snow. But I couldn't shake the feeling, that moment on the radio, that voice gasping for help. I still hear it sometimes when I leave my CB on too long. Always faint, buried in static. The same tone, the same words. "Southbound on 19. Please, anyone there?" And even though I've changed routes, even though I don't drive nights anymore, I still find myself glancing at the mile markers when the fog settles over the ridges, waiting to see if there's another truck down there, half buried, still calling for help from somewhere deep in the snow.